Good morning, everyone. Yedek and Wenwen. Welcome to the BC Assembly of First Nations and Union of BC Indian Chiefs webinar entitled First Nations Citizenship Membership, Eliminating Sex Discrimination in the Indian Act. Thank you for joining us in this important gathering. In Squash Nishamyam, Toothla Insuletgo. My parents are Bill and Beverly Bob. My grandparents are Lily and Paul Oppenheim. Ada and Peter Bob. I'm elected the BCAFN Women's Representative and serving on the AFN Women's Council. My Thompson name is Rainbow, which my grandfather Peter Bob gifted me. My English name is Cheryl Rule, and I'm from the Coldwater Indian Band in the Insuletgo and the Intlagutmuk territory. I am the vice chief of the Coldwater Indian Band, and I'm a descendant of a long line of ancestry in the Coldwater Indian Band. I spent much of my life hunting, fishing, harvesting medicinal, and food plants for my family and with my family. This has installed a deep love and respect for my people and the land. I'm grateful to be joining this meeting from my ancestral and traditional territory, unceded territory of the Insuletgo Coldwater Indian Band. Before we continue, I would now invite Christina Dragon, the IRSS Health Support Worker, to provide an opening prayer.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you this morning. I have lit my smudge bowl for all of you, and I invite you to join me and to do the same if you're able to do that, to cleanse and to bless this meeting. Dear Creator, thank you for this day and for all our blessings. Thank you for this opportunity to gather and to connect for this sacred work. We are grateful for our ancestors. May they feel our love. Bless our communities with the blanket of continuous healing. Bless our leadership with strength and wisdom. We send peace to all those holding loss during this Christmas season. May their hearts be comforted. We pray for all those impacted by floods and extreme cold weather. Bless our people with empowerment and cultural strengths. We thank you for all that Mother Earth provides. Help us to continue to fulfill our purpose. Bless this meeting and all those attending. In your name, all my relations. Ho ho.
Thank you to the IRS SSS Health Support Worker, Christina Dragon, for your opening prayer. Christina will be also available as a resource if anyone needs additional one-on-one support. If you are activated by any of the conversation today or have a story you need to be witnessed, Christina is here to support you. I guess I have a few little housekeeping about our meeting today. This session is being recorded. This is a webinar. the chat functions and the questions and answers will not be activated. Thank you to those who have submitted questions in advance, and we look forward to addressing them in the question and answer period. To access support during the session or afterwards, please reach out to the contact list in the chat. As a chair, I want to remind everyone of the importance of creating safe and inclusive environment with our words and actions. I welcome everyone onto this webinar, recognizing that we have a sacred role. I want to acknowledge that the purpose of this webinar is to promote awareness and understanding of ongoing sexual discrimination in the Indian Act and support First Nations communities and impacted individuals to critically engage with issues like the second generational cutoff, which is having devastating impacts on First Nations. We do not claim to be experts, but work to support First Nations communities and to connect impacted individuals to resources to help you find answers you seek. For everyone's record, I will share a quick agenda overview. Our next speaker is the BCFN Regional Chief Terry TG, who will provide opening remarks. And then we will close with, or we will welcome Chief Slett, the UBCIC Secretary Treasurer, and the Chief of the Haletsku Tribe Council. We will present on sexual discrimination in the Indian Act and provide an update on Bill S2. At 9:40, Sharon McIver of the Lornicla Indian Band will share reflections on the history and impacts of sexual discrimination on First Nations women. At 10, we will take a 10-minute break from 10 to 10 and allow for a brief rest. After the break from 10:30 to 11, Harmony Johnson from Siletkus, the Talamon Nation, will walk through the UBC BCFN resource, including key positions and perspectives of the BC First Nations. This will be followed by an exercise on how to draft a letter to Indigenous Service Canada and the members of Parliament, providing practical guidance in communicating with Indigenous Service Canada. The webinar will then move into a question and answer period at 11 until 12 p.m., moderated by myself with panelists Harmony Johnson and Sharon McIver. We will be responding to questions that we have received from attendees. This meeting will conclude with the formal adjournment at 12 p.m. If you have any questions about today's session, please reach out to Rochelle King at ROCHELLE.KING@bcafn.ca or Elena Pinnell at EPENNELL@UBCIC.ca, and they will put that in the chat for you, so it'll be easy to get their contact information. To continue our morning, we would now like to welcome the BCFN Regional Chief Terry Chiji to share opening remarks.
Thank you, Cheryl. Denizat and Seikuzat Skies. First of all, I want to acknowledge the territory that I'm calling from, Claytley, Tane, the Dakat people, North Central BC, unceded and surrendered continued occupied territory of the Dakat people. My name is Terry Teedy. I'm the Regional Chief for the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations. Thank you, Cheryl, and once again, thank you, Christina, for the opening prayer. Certainly, prayers to all those experiencing the floods down in the Fraser Valley. Today, we stand at a very critical moment in time in the long struggle to uphold the rights, dignity, and continuity of First Nations peoples, in particular our women. On December 4th, just a few days ago, the Standing Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples secured a landslide vote on Bill S2 to move forward with the amendments which will safeguard the future of First Nations and eliminate the discrimination and really, I think the racist legislation for the betterment of our future generations and remove the second generation cutoff rule. Bill S2 was designed, in particular with some of the amendments that were made, and it still needs to be voted on by the House of Commons. At the core of the issue is the inclusion of second generation cutoff in the amendments. The second generation cutoff is an unjust provision that legally bars the transmission of status and associated rights and entitlements after two generations of parenting with non-status person. This current day oppression and assimilationist and very racist rules were introduced by Canada in 1985 and continue to threaten the very existence of status Indians and will, if left unchanged, lead to our legal extinction within only a few generations. The British Columbia Assembly First Nations and the Union of BC Indian Chiefs demands that the House of Commons not only recognize but uphold the inherent rights of First Nations peoples. It is their duty, in alignment with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and also United Nations Declaration Act, to act with integrity and accountability, ensuring that the legal obligations are reflected in the Declaration Act regarding justice and equity are fulfilled, resulting in real outcomes for generations to come. First Nations families have been calling for this change and for a long time. Changes beyond 7 generations, and now Canada's lawmakers have really this moment in time and a profound opportunity to stand with First Nations peoples. I honor the unwavering leadership of trailblazers like Sharon McIver, who will be on later, and Chief Barbara Cote, and many others who steadfastly have been advocating and has illuminated the path towards justice and equality. Their courage, combined with the collaborative efforts of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous senators, has provided a clear pathway forward to end the sex and race-based discrimination woven within the second generation cutoff and two-parent rule. Their work stand as a testament to what is possible with truth, and which guides action and reconciliation to become a shared responsibility. Today's webinar, we will have an opportunity to learn about the process related to S2 and enhance the understanding on the ongoing discrimination in the Indian Act and its continual impact and harm on our communities and families. Today, in the future, tomorrow, in the days to come, we call on members of Parliament to uphold the vote to repeal the second generation cutoff from the Indian Act. We call on every member to meet this moment with courage, with clarity, and with the commitment required to finally bring an end to discriminatory policies and that have harmed many of our First Nations families for far too long. So with that, I thank you all from wherever you're calling from. Certainly an important moment in time to make change for the betterment. Thank you. Wasicho.
Iksham, thank you to Regional Chief Terry TG for your leadership, continued advocacy, and alliance in this work. We are very grateful for all you do to ensure the well-being of First Nations is cared for. I would like to now introduce you to our next speaker, Chief Marilyn Slett, the UBCIC Secretary Treasurer and Chief of Hiletsku Tribal Council. Chief Marilyn Slett is a member of the Hiletsku Nation and elected Chief Counselor of the tribe. She is currently serving her 5th consecutive term as Chief Counselor, beginning in 2008. She is also the President of the Coastal First Nation, Secretary Treasurer of the Union of BC of Indian Chiefs, and a board of the Pacific Pialage Authority. As a chief counselor, Marilyn has guided her First Nations collective protection of their environment. She believes that the forests, mountains, seas, plants, and animals are the foundation of her nation's inheritance to be protected and nourished. She has advocated for the recognition of the title land rights and the birthright of her community members. I'd like to welcome Chief Slett.
Good morning, Gayatsuka. Can you hear me okay? Great, thank you. I'm calling in from the Coast Salish Territory, and would like to thank the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh for allowing us to do this work, on their homelands. And thank you, Christina, for the opening. And I hope to bear with me too here. I'm at the airport. Flying home to my community today of Helsinki. So it's going to be a little bit noisy. But I'm really pleased to be here today virtually with all of you to discuss this really important matter that we've been advocating for many years on. And today we'll give an overview of the latest activities to date and some of the work going forward. So in my presentation today, I'll provide that brief overview of the sex discrimination from the Indian Act and an update on Bill S2 and discuss self-determination over citizenship and share examples from my nation, the Helsinki Nation. So one of the questions is, what is sex discrimination in the Indian Act? And what are the impacts and how does it affect First Nations today? So under the Indian Act, First Nations women have been treated differently than First Nations men. And this has had cascading effects for their descendants. Up until 1985, First Nations men who married non-status women endowed their status onto their wives and children, whereas First Nations women who married non-status men lost their status, and this is the sex discrimination. And there were changes in 1985. First Nations women who married out lost their status are now eligible for status through Bill C-31. That was in 1985. But in Bill C-31 created new problems, and the tool and it also introduced new categories of status. And this is what we have today, 6-1 status, 6-2 status, with differing abilities to transmit status and the second generation cutoff rule. I always use myself for an example because it's easy to, to put a face. I married a non-status person, and I have 2 sons, and one of my sons married a non-status person, and now my 2 grandchildren are not eligible for to be recognized under the Indian Act as Helsinki citizens, as Helsinki members. So therein lies, the discrimination that we're talking about today. The second generation cutoff legally bars the transmission of status and associated rights and entitlements to children after 2 generations of parenting with a non-status person. So this means that a person with 6-2 status can only transmit status if their child, if the other parent is also another status holder. Harmony will provide examples of this later in her presentation. So the new rules favored households with status man because his status wife gained status, making the two status household. And they were able to transmit 6-1 status to their children. And in contrast, in households with a status man, women who could not endow her status onto her non-status husband, making her a one-status household. She can then only transmit 6-2 status onto her children. And that's my example that I used with myself and my children. So again, making it so her child can only transmit status if they parented with another status holder, whereas 6-1 could transmit status even if they parented with a non-status person. So, we're outlining where that discrimination still continues today and the impacts that it has on our communities. So therefore, the transmission of status has been unequal on the basis of sex. And many of our people move away from our communities for education, for employment, to seek opportunities, or they marry non-status people and have children. And they should be free to do so without having to consider their children's legal entitlements. Every First Nation across Canada is impacted by these rules and has high percentages of 6-2 status holders in their community, between 20 and 50%. My community, the Helsik Nation, has 20% of our band membership is registered as a 6-2. So you'll be able to see the percentage in your community. There's going to be a link in the chat, and that information is available for all communities to see, what their membership looks like in terms of 6-1s and 6-2s. So, this hurts our people, our children and our grandchildren, and they face devastating impacts and forceful disconnection from their land, their family, their communities, language, rules and governance, and their identities. So we continue to lose entitled members, jeopardizing our nations, our resources, and our land. Second generation cutoff puts tremendous strain on status to support our children who are not entitled to provide the same level of care as registered members. And this includes housing, education, and health services. Canada cannot offload that fiduciary responsibility onto First Nations. It is projected that there will be more status Indians there'll be no more status Indians in just 3 to 4 generations. And for some, it is much sooner. And that goes, if you look at the link and you look at how many are registered as 6-2s, demographers have, provided comments and reports around, how actually our numbers will grow as people, but, the people that are registered and legally entitled and acknowledged as, members under the Indian Act will shrink over time. So we're facing legal extinction under the Indian Act. So what is being done about it? UBCIC has advocated for the end of sex discrimination in the Indian Act for decades, alongside leading plaintiffs who went to court to assert their rights. UBC has lobbied Canada and used international mechanisms like the United Nations to eliminate discrimination in the Indian Act. And I had the opportunity to travel with to go to the CEDAW committee in Geneva with UBCIC representatives and members of the Indian Act Sex Discrimination Working Group, Sharon McIver, who is, led the way for, our people in, highlighting, the discrimination that we face with the Indian Act. And, we brought forward, our real life experiences, plus the data, plus the recommendations, and with those comments and calls to action to end the sex discrimination now that we can no longer, we can't be in this era of reconciliation and have our calls to action and do all of this work that we're doing and still continue to discriminate against our women and their descendants. So UBC, IC, and BCAFN have resolutions to call on Canada to end the second generation cutoff and to move forward with a one-parent rule for the transmission of status. And together we have worked to promote awareness and take action to protect and uphold the rights of our communities. And First Nations across the country are clear that we are the ultimate authority on deciding who our citizens are. We know who our people are. And when we discuss citizenship and membership, it is crucial that it is not conflated with Indian registration status. Status is determined by Canada and defines the Crown's legal and fiduciary obligations and our rights and entitlements as First Nations under the Indian Act. And citizenship and membership can be determined by bands, but do not determine status or come with the resources from Canada. So, for example, you can be a band member without status or have status and not be recognized by a band. It is complicated sometimes, but these are real things that happen to our members. So many of the members from my community, they don't know that their grandchildren aren't entitled until you're trying to register your grandchild or register yourself. So calls for bands to determine their own members do not preclude Canada from recognizing First Nations rights. So long as Canada is determining Indian registration, it has an obligation to fix the mess and restore those rights. Canada must reverse forced assimilation and ensure registration, reparation, and reconnection. First Nations are under-resourced and decentralized from supporting new members, which can result in continued discrimination against women returning to their bands. Canada must ensure that First Nations are not forced to apply fiscally driven government definitions of who qualifies as a member. Canada must restore First Nations women and their descendants to their nations, respect First Nations citizenship laws, and provide resourcing and land bases to support First Nations with increased membership to address underlying scarcity. Our survival depends on the ability to welcome and support our citizens. And my nation, the Heiltsuk Nation, last February, we passed our constitution. And we have some core laws that we're developing. And one of our very first core laws is citizenship. And, we are going to be engaging with our community around that law. But along with the citizenship and recognizing our members, we also have a policy piece that aligns with it around how to reconnect people back to our community. And that can include things like visits, organizing visits to the community, genealogy with, their family trees, introducing them to family members, providing them with access to resources around Heiltsuk. We do a lot of things virtually online. We have a lot of members that live off reserve out of our community, and we hold that, we're Heiltsuk no matter where we are and where we live. So we also have a custom adoptions that is traditional to our people, and we've recognized grandchildren of grandmothers that that whole 6-2 description that I went through earlier, where that applied to their grandchildren, and they We're custom adopted in our big house. So I have a video here that I would like to share with you. And I'm really sorry for the background noise, but Diaxica, thank you. The framework for moving forward together for the future that our ancestors dreamed of. I close with the simple yet powerful words of our elders. Be proud of where you come from. Be proud to be Helsik. Today we stand together. We are Helsik. What does it mean to be Helsik? What do Canada's Indian Act policies on Indian status and registration entitlement mean for the Helsik Nation and others like it? The second generation cutoff is the modern legacy of decades of sex-based discrimination in the Indian Act. For over a century, the Act stripped First Nations women of their status if they married a non-status person. This rule continues that discrimination by denying status to the grandchildren of those women who married non-status partners. It forcibly disconnects women and their descendants from their land, family, communities, culture, and language, using family trees as a tool of forced assimilation. This isn't abstract. For the Heiltsuk Nation, 20% of their registered population is directly at risk. For many First Nations, these rates are as high as 40 to 50%. First Nations are facing legal extinction in a matter of 3 to 4 generations. This also places an impossible strain on the community. Canada controls Indian status, which determines the legal recognition and the funding bands receive to support their people. While nations strive to support all of their citizens, those denied status by Canada lose access to critical supports like health, education, and housing. At the same time, First Nations determine the citizenship of their people, such as through customary adoptions. The Heiltsuk have always known who their people are. Even when Canada refuses to recognize their people with status, they continue to support their citizens with their own resources where they can, because they know they belong. But this is not sustainable. Canada must provide proper resourcing and an expanded land base to First Nations to support their returning citizens. As a grandmother to 2 grandbabies that Canada refuses to recognize, Chief Slet feels this injustice deeply. Her grandchildren, Mordecai and Rita, are being raised in their culture, learning the Haistjuk language, and are recognized as Haistjuk citizens through the nation's custom adoptions, guided by their indigenous laws, or Quitlas. We use her family to illustrate one example of the many Heiltsuk families discriminated against by Canada. During Heiltsuk family potlatches and feasts, we have witnessed custom adoptions of children who fall under Canada's discriminatory legislation. Grandmother Kelly McGarvey Simmons custom adopting her grandson, Declan Aaron James Simmons. Grandmother Raya Reed custom adopting her grandson, Caden Richard Reed. Great Aunt Bessie Carpenter custom adopting her late sister Eileen's grandchildren, Harper and Hudson Innes. Chief Slet's grandson Morty is 3 years old and lives in Bella Bella and attends Heiltsuk Language Nest, learning Haistjukla and the values that guide Heiltsuk society. His Haistjuk name is Bach Tsua, which translates to likes to do everything. Chief Slet's granddaughter Rita is 1 year old and learning Haistjukla. Her Haistjuk name is Ananau, which translates to expression of affection. Though they were both uplifted in the community under Heiltsuk law, Canada's discriminatory 2-parent rule still denies them status because their father is registered under Section 6.2, the second generation cutoff. Haistjuk children have the right to be raised within their culture, language, traditions, and territories, grounded in feelings of happiness and belonging within their community and their way of life, a right upheld by the Heiltsuk Constitution,
This is a powerful example of self-determination.
To those who come from the outside, understand this. We do not seek permission. We are not becoming a nation. We are a nation. Today, under Helsic Guilas, under Hifja Guilas, the HEMOS Council, they declare that the Gegasis Guilas, our Constitution, is now in full force and now in full effect. Wait.
First Nations should hold the ultimate authority to decide who their citizens are. However, so long as Canada controls Indian registration, it has a duty to first fix the mess it has made. To do otherwise would be to make forced assimilation permanent. Canada must eliminate all remaining sex and race-based discrimination from the Indian Act and respect First Nations' right to self-determination over citizenship law, and must reverse forced assimilation through registration, reconnection, and reparations once and for all. The time for delay is over.
Can you hear me? So, yes, thank you so much for, I'm not sure. Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to present here today. And thank you for your patience. I know it's not the best with the background noise, but really felt it was important to share some of the work of the BCIC and some of the examples of the Helsic dealing with our video. So Gayaksika to the panel and to all of you for being here today. And as we continue this important work together. Thank you so much. And I'm going to go board my plane. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chief Slet. That was very amazing. And, I'm very proud of the work that you're doing. We have so much work to do, and I can share that I also am impacted by this very law that has gone through with my own family. My grandchildren are also, they can't get their status. And we just found out recently, and it really breaks my heart, that we're going through this. We've taught our families to live with the land, live on the land, and to be told, no, you're not an Indian is very, very heartbreaking. I really appreciate that Chief Sled has taken time out of her day to be here with us. And I really thank her for the update that was provided. It's a lot of work that we have to do to amend the Indian Act. And for being vulnerable by sharing of how the second generation cutoff rule is impacting our family. And as First Nations leaders and what the nation has been doing to combat the oppressions against our people, especially First Nations women. I really appreciate her ongoing work, and it just shows how much we also need to do. With great honor and respect, I want to introduce you to Sharon McIver. Sharon is a lawyer, educator that works in the Nicola Valley at NVAT. I have known Sharon my whole growing up life, and I'm so grateful to have her mentor us and show us the way. She is from the Lornica Indian Band, and a former leader of the Native Women's Associations of Canada, a member of the steering committee of the Feminist Alliance for International Action, a member of the Indian Act Sexual Discrimination Working Group. She's also a plaintiff as McIver versus Canada, a constitutional challenge to the sexual discrimination in the Indian Act, and subsequently a petition to the United Nations. She is a grandmother to so many who had their status restored because of her efforts. Her legal challenges have resulted in about 250,000 women and their descendants gaining Indian status that was denied to them because of sexual discrimination. You know, I'm just so grateful to have Sharon here today and so proud of all the work she's done. And I really, I'm excited to hear this session. And, you know, I've looked forward to it since I found out she was going to present. And I really am happy to see you today, Sharon. And I look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you, Cheryl. And of course, we're of the same nation. We're not the same band, but we're the same nation. And I just want to tell you that I'm coming to you from Vancouver today, and I'm using my iPad. I had intended to go home. I was down for Wednesday night, and I intended to go home Thursday morning. And I found out Thursday morning that all the highways to the interior had been closed because of floods in the Lower Mainland. So I'm sitting in a hotel room right now using my iPad. Ironically, on November the 16th, 2021, I was in Vancouver, and I got a call from my daughter in the morning, just quickly saying, "Mom, we're being evacuated, and we've got everything from your house." And it turned out that we were totally flooded out, and I was stuck in Vancouver for almost 2 weeks before I could drive my car back up home. So and my daughter said, "Well, you're away both times we've been flooded out." Anyway, and I just telling you that because all of my notes and that are at home. So most of what I'm going to tell you now is just my memory. So first of all, my name is Sharon McIver. I'm in Lakitmuk from South Central British Columbia. I'm from the Nicola Valley, and I was born in the Nicola Valley. My mom and dad were born in the Nicola Valley. My maternal family, my grandmother Mary, my great-grandmother Enochs, and so on, have all been born in the Nicola Valley. My children, my 3 biological children were born in the Nicola Valley. My grandchildren, most of them have been born in the Nicola Valley, and 3 out of 4 of my great-grandchildren have been born in the Nicola Valley. My great-granddaughter Skimich, and 2 of her siblings were born within a kilometer of where I was born. So my roots are really long and deep in the Nicola Valley. I've been working on what's called activism. I didn't know that's what I was doing to begin with, but for a long time, I did my first civil disobedience with my activism in July of 1968. And I guess the most important thing is that you have to understand that the Indian Act itself has been dictating how Indians are dealt with since before Confederation. There was some legislation that was come out of Britain that restricted a lot of the things that we could do. And more importantly, what we don't know, most but don't know, and have no way of knowing, is that when I was born, there was a section in the Indian Act that defined a person, and a person is a legal entity, somebody that can make decisions for themselves and make life choices on their own. So if you're a person, if you're a legal person, you can make contracts, buy things, take care of your own the things that you need to do. If you're not a person, it means that you cannot do it on your own. Somebody else has to do it for you. So the definition of person in the Indian Act when I was born and for a few years after was a person is anyone other than an Indian. So they had defined us not being a person for a very long period of time. And that actually is part of the overall plan that most colonizing countries get into as soon as they get enough power in the country they discovered, and of course want the land and resources. As Cheryl said, I was in the leadership of the Native Women's Association of Canada for quite a few years, and in that capacity also sued the government. But that's a whole nother issue. And we successfully attained what we wanted to when we took that case. The Native Women's Association of Canada had a forerunner with women like Mary Tuax-Early and her colleagues in a group called Indian Rights for Indian Women. These are the women that married out and lost their status. And it then became Native Women's Association of Canada. My personal involvement was a lot of activist work with various groups and with the Native Women's Association of Canada, lots of work with trying to get the Indian Act changed. The Indian Act itself is has nothing to do with self-government, Indian rights, the inherent rights we have because of who we were born. It was just a piece of legislation that was put in place to control what we do and what rights we have. And so it's really important to remember that, because each time we talk about Section 6.1 and 6.2 of the Indian Act, we get a lot of people, particularly other Indigenous people, that say, no, we don't want to do it that way. We want our inherent rights. We want to make our own decision about who belongs to our communities. And that's really important. But what we're doing here on what is now S2 is just challenging the status rules that were put in place by the federal government. And as Marilyn had said earlier, it's something to, it's a genocide or forced assimilation, and basically means that one day there will be no status Indians left. And constitutionally, the federal government, under its power, has the responsibility for Indians and land reserved for Indians. So we always get mixed up when we're thinking that what's going on with S2 is interfering with our right to make our own determination on who are our members. That's not true. We just try, as Marilyn said earlier, we're trying to get them to clean up the mess they made when they had a lot of discrimination against Indians. And they're saying it's gender neutral right now, and on its face it is. But what happens is that the impact on the women who married out, the impact of the second generation cutoff happens sooner with them than their male counterparts that did not marry out. So over the years, we have Bill C-31, and that was put into place on, well, technically April the 17th, 1985. And April the 17th, 1982, Canada brought in constitutional legislation that had a section on equality rights. And what they did was the section on equality rights, which was section 15, was suspended in its operation for 3 years. And it gave Canada and the provinces 3 years to clean up the discrimination in their legislation. And there was a lot of it. And of course, the Indian Act was a huge piece of discrimination against women. So in April of 17th of 1985, the federal government had to put into place legislation that Indian Act legislation that had its discrimination removed. That didn't happen until June the 26th of 1985 because they were slow in getting it going. But and that's what was Bill C-31. And as we know, they did take out the discriminatory section about the marrying out part. But what they did, because prior to that, it was basically a one-parent rule. The definition of in the Indian Act was an Indian man, his wife, and his children. So that Indian man could pass his status down without having a partner that had status. And as Marilyn said earlier, he could give status to his non-Indigenous wife. So technically she became an Indian, and technically it was a two-parent rule, but it was the Indian man that could give the status to his wife and his children. And so what they did in Bill C-31 is they made the Indian man subject to our two-generation or two-parent rule. And so that's saying, okay, it's gender neutral. We made the men equal to the women, and the women had lesser rights all along. So it's a game that's played with the government when they change, when they make legislation. But C-31 was the first time that the two-parent rule kicked in. And as previous speaker says, if you're 6'1", you can pass it on in your own right. If you're 6'2", you have to have the other parent having status. And statistics, there's a man by the name of Stuart Clatsworthy that did a lot of work on looking at the situations and the effect. And he said in 2007 that there will be a band in Manitoba that will have its last status Indian born in 2030, which is less than 5 years from now. And that was the effect of this having 6'2". So I challenged the second generation cutoff. They said my mom had married out, and that wasn't true. She was just not registered. And so my mom posthumously got her status, and I got 6'2" status. And of course, my children weren't eligible. So I challenged that. And then they and successfully challenged it because my children would be 6'2s. It just moved it down and would be 6'2s. And so what happened was the government offered us a deal. My son could get status if we dropped the case. And of course, that was in 2006. And what happened with that is I talked to my son, and I said, you can get your status today if we just drop it. And he thought about 30 seconds and said, no, Mom, let's continue on with it. So he actually did not get his status until 2011. So C-31 included the next generation. the grandchildren of the women who married out. That's what the court told the government, that it was discriminatory and they had to clean it all up. And if you look in the original decision from my case, most of the suggestions by the court were things that we put forward, to do the work so that didn't have to do it now. They only changed the small part. So we got grandchildren that were included. That was Bill C3. And then in 2017, there was a bill called S3, and that was from another case, the Deschanel case, and the government was forced to change the law and was given a certain length of time to do it. We got involved with the Senate at that point, our Indian Act Sex Discrimination Working Group and others, and lobbied the senators and were successful in doing that. And we were able to get the bill S3 amended to include what we called the 61A all the way. And it meant that all of us that were born before April the 17th, 1985, got full status and not half status, because as I said, the legislation that was put in place made it that us that married out had less status than our brothers. And so Bill S2, I don't have much time to talk about it, but Bill S2 is what we've done again. We've amended it. What they wanted to do was look at natal bans. Women who married out into another band couldn't go back to their natal bands. And so that was covered in S2, and enfranchisement was covered in S2. And both of those are involved about 3,500 people. Those were the only people that were originally going to be dealt with in Bill S2. We again went back and lobbied the Senate and were successful in having the bill amended. Bill S2 now covers the second generation cutoff, the 1985 cutoff, and is getting rid of the bar to compensation. Two things. We've gone internationally. One of our groups has gone internationally and had the United Nations Human Rights and Committee on the Elimination Against Women declare that the Indian Act, that discrimination on the Indian Act is the major cause of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls crisis, and also told Canada they should or they must clean up that. We have the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights also, who we lobbied, and we got the same back from them. And I guess the last thing I'm going to say is the bans across the country. We got these statistics from Canada, and most of the bans across the country, I don't know what's the difference between 6.1 and 6.2, but most of them, because we were able to look at the stats, have at least 30% 6.2s, and some, especially those on the East Coast, are up to almost 50%. And so you've got half of the band with your next generation not being able to register the children. So it's a termination document, and we really have to do something about it. And S2 is another step, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Sharon. That's so much information. And it's great to hear the work you've done and the work that still needs to happen. I always love listening to everything that you bring forward because it's so important that, we're all aware, we're informed, and we can create change by being aware. So, Guksham, thank you. I hope you have a safe trip home. I know the highways have been very crazy with them being closed in the last little bit, and I wish you well when you travel home. Guksham.
Okay, Cheryl, I just wanted to add something else, is that
Yes.
with the Senate and the House of Commons, we know the House of Commons does not want these amendments to be passed. And Galmasti, the current Minister of Indian Affairs, who is an Indigenous woman from a band in the East, is very adamant that they admit that it's discriminatory, but they need to consult. And we can't, no one they can not consult someone that agree to continue discrimination. Nobody has the right to say it's okay to discriminate. And they're saying, okay, we need consultation. And I'm not sure about what, but that's a really, really important point, that they need time, and it's the thing that they've done. Galmasti was the 19th Minister of Indian Affairs I've dealt with over the time I've been doing this work. And what she said the last time when we were doing S3, what she said is exactly what Carolyn Bennett said, the minister at that time, about, yes, we promise we're going to get it done, we just need more time. And of course, as you know, the promise didn't happen because Carolyn, as I think about 3-4 ministers ago, but I heard that a long time ago, when we went in and it was about matrimonial property on reserve, and we're told, yes, we know it's discriminatory, we know we have to do something, and if you let us get this bill through, it was the C3 when we were talking about it, we'll take care of that, we promise you. So I guess we're just still waiting for that promise to happen, and I think maybe we have to put more pressure on to make sure that they will fulfill the promise they made in 2000. Well, that last time personally made the promise was in 2010, I think. So I just wanted to say that the House of Commons is going to fight hard, and they have Indigenous allies that don't want to clean it up. And when they say we've got to consult, they did that with my case. My case started in 1989, and we didn't get to court till 2006 because they kept saying, well, we've got to consult, and we've got 20,000 documents that we have to review because that's what we gathered when we did Bill C-31. So it's just a tactic. So I'll be gone by the time all of this is cleaned up. But we do have lots of young women that are on board, and they think that I think I'm the oldest one still actively fighting. But anyway, we've got lots of young women that are really good and ready to step in.
Yes.
Okay.
And thank you for training them, Sharon. I'm very proud of my cousin Melissa Moses, who is working with you and learning from you. And, she definitely always speaks on how much she is learning. And, I really appreciate the work that you've done in supporting our women. This is so important. And yes, it's so much work. We have so much to do.
But we need to speak for those coming after us. My great grandchildren, and Pam Palmer's grandchildren, and of course our young friend Zoe Craig Sparrow, who not her children won't be eligible, and she's going to get married and have kids within the next couple of years. So, and all of those children like them, that's who we're fighting for. We need to make sure that we can do what we can to make sure that they are able to exercise their inherent rights, the rights they were born with. Okay, and that's it. I'm not going to say anything else.
Thank you, Sharon. You're amazing. I just love you so much and so grateful that, we have you backing us. The work has started so many years ago, and it's still continuing. And, it's important that we align as First Nation women to create change. So, Guksham, thank you so much. We're going to go to a 10-minute break, and when we return, we will be having a video that we want to share. So we'll see you all back in 10 minutes. Hey, welcome back. We hope you're feeling rejuvenated and are ready to dive into the next segment where Harmony Johnson will be providing us with an overview entitled Indian Act's Second Generation Cutoff, BC's First Nations Perspective and Positions, along with a brief exercise on drafting and sending a letter to the Minister of ISK and members of Parliament. Harmony belongs to the Talmon Nation, First Nation. She operates a consulting business providing strategy and advisory services in Indigenous health, governance, data, and human rights, as well as teaches on the same matters. She also serves as the Vice President of Indigenous Wellness and Reconciliation at the Providence Health Center, and in this role develops strategy and policy direction that promotes reconciliation and addresses anti-Indigenous racism and discrimination, and facilitates system transformation through initiatives, programs, and research. Harmony is a co-author of a number of publications, including print and digital books about her grandmother's life's history and teachings. She has a BA from Simon Fraser University and a MHA from the University of British Columbia. Harmony, please proceed with your presentation when you're ready.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, Christina, for the opening prayer. The speakers before me have talked about how Indian Act status was an imposed concept that's been this tool of assimilation, that there have been many decades of piecemeal changes to the Indian Act to attempt to address those issues, which have created this complex and confusing piecemeal approach that we continue to navigate today, and that, as Sharon noted, many recipients of that confusion actually aren't even aware of it until it comes time for registration. Everybody's also emphasized how those status categories have been particularly discriminatory against First Nations women and their descendants, and how they've had these really divisive effects within our nations. The future impacts are such that, like many nations, at some point will become legally extinct unless these legacies are not addressed. So in that really complicated context, UBCIC and the BCIFN have passed resolutions, as the regional chief spoke to, calling on the government of Canada to address these issues, abolish all of those remaining discrimination in the Indian Act. And so those organizations asked me about a year ago to pull some materials together to inform that advocacy. So I'm here today to give you a technical report on those products that we developed. I would just say, as you know, this matter has increased in urgency significantly, and we have this short-term opportunity in front of us to address this issue. So I'll walk you through the materials that we developed a year ago. They still stand, and the urgency has increased. And so we'll get into the specifics of what you can do to support advocacy on this during my little brief time here. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'll just kind of walk you through a set of materials we've got. So before I go further, I do first want to acknowledge the leadership that's continued to advocate for equity, inclusion, elimination of sex discrimination in the Indian Act. It really is this tireless advocacy by a number of affected individuals, particularly women, who have been themselves impacted and their families impacted, that have kind of stood in that gap and forced change to the status provisions of the Indian Act through the years. We may be finally on the precipice of resolving this. And so, let's step into the gap with these women that have been doing this work for a long time. The power is in our hands to advocate and to take one small measure that we can do to support the work that they have been doing for decades. So There's just a few photos on this screen, but there are like many leaders in this work: Yvonne Bedard, Mary Two Acts Early, Sandra Lovelace, Sharon McIver, of course, Jeanette Corbière-Laval, Pam Palmater, Chief Marilyn Slett, many, many more. And so like one of the materials that we developed honors their work, but it just like felt important to me that we start this technical report with acknowledging that that a lot of the gains that we've made on this particular issue is really due to the tireless advocacy of a few. So what is this second generation cutoff? I mean, the previous speakers have actually done a really great job of describing this. So I'll try to keep this fairly brief, but there is a lot of complexity in the status provisions of the Indian Act and how they have evolved through time. I'm not going to cover all of that. Again, one of the products we developed is a reading list. It includes a whole bunch of background information and explainers and scenarios that cover all of that in detail. So like just at a high level, like from 1876 to 1985, there was a one-parent rule in place. This was the one that allowed only men to transmit Indian status. So we all know this. It was spoken to by previous speakers. First Nations men who married out retained their status and passed it on to their wives and children, regardless of whether those the wives were connected necessarily to community. Whereas First Nations women with status who married non-First Nations men lost their status, as did all of their descendants. So in 1985, then, because of some of the efforts of the women I just spoke to on the previous slide, Bill C-31 Indian Act amendments were passed, and those reinstated status to women who had lost it through marriage, removed that automatic linkage between marriage and status, and created a process for individuals to regain their status. At the same time, this also created these categories of 6-1 and 6-2. So the second generation of those enrolled under 6-2 are no longer eligible for status. You can see that in the diagram on the right. So this just like perpetuates these sex-based inequities that this amendment was supposedly trying to solve, right? The root of that issue has not yet been addressed. So the graphic on the left kind of like, it may be hard to see, hopefully you can see it okay, but it kind of shows the almost like nonsensical and damaging effects that these current provisions can have within the same family, with siblings even potentially having different status categories. So all of this means that there's this growing loss of entitlement to Indian status among our people. If all of the current rules remain in place within one generation, so like maybe 25 years, about 1 in every 4 children born on reserve is expected to lack entitlement for registration and eligibility for status. And then within 3 generations, so 75 years, children who qualify for status are expected to be a minority. And that is on reserve. This is expected to happen much more quickly off reserve. So I'll just like give a couple of examples here. So like me, if I just use myself as an example. So I'm a 6-1. Me and my first cousins, we have the same ancestry. We have the same connection to Tla'amin Nation. Their mom married out pre-1985. My mom was like, no way, I'm not losing my status. And so because of that, I'm a 6-1. My children would be entitled to status no matter who I decide to parent with. They might become 6-2s if the other parent was non-status. My first cousins, they're 6-2 because their mom had to re-register under after Bill C-31. So their kids today don't have status because their other parents don't have status. So if 2 generations have children with non-status partners, the 3rd generation lose status. That's essentially the 2nd generation cutoff. Another example for Tla'amin. Today in our nation, I heard Chief Marilyn Slett talk about how 20% of their registered population is 6-2s. In Tla'amin, it's 33%. So 33% of our enrolled folks with membership with Indian Act registration are impacted by this 2nd generation cutoff. If the rules remain unchanged, the percentage of the population that have status is going to like drop off a cliff, right? The nation, they might still be living here. They might still be connected in community. the nation will not be receiving program and service funding for those individuals. So it's going to create also this added fiscal pressure that we need to be attuned to. These two graphics just show the kind of slow decline of 6-1s through time and the increasing proportion of those who are not eligible for status. And so you can see that decline kind of from 2025 to 2050. These are population projections I ran the other day. And then you can see that by 21, 22, 23, that it's essentially entirely non-status. I would also just say I'm going to talk a little bit about population projections. Sharon spoke to Stuart Clapworthy's work, which is excellent. It's also like getting a bit dated at this point in time. It's been like quite a number of years since those projections were run. So we do have a tool that would allow you to run new refreshed population projections today, if you would like to do so. So talking a little bit about where we are today and the kind of current context. So all of those issues that I just talked about, like all of these problems, they've led to these multiple attempts to amend the Indian Act. Sharon spoke to this, like 2010, 2017, 2022. But these inequities still remain in place. We have not solved the issue. There is this other opportunity that's right in front of us currently that we're talking about called S2. So what is it? So initially, Bill S2 was introduced by the Standing Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples in response to the court ruling Nicholas v. Canada. It dealt with the restoration of status for individuals and descendants who lost it. Like there was like a kind of a specific scenario that they're addressing with Bill S2. However, the Senate committee heard from over 60 witnesses that this is not good enough. We should not be just tweaking and addressing this small issue. Let's just fix the problem that's been in front of us for a long time that people are aware of. Fix the issue that they introduced in 1985 with Bill C-31. UBCIC, many others acted as witnesses before the Senate committee, members of the Indian Act Sex Discrimination Working Group like Sharon McIver, First Nations women advocates, the national chief. Everybody was pretty well on the same page. Remove the second generation cutoff. So the Senate committee did vote in favor of including those amendments, and then the Senate voted in favor thereafter. So the Senate accepted the recommendations from that standing committee. So those amendments are removing the second generation cutoff and moving to a one-parent rule, removing the 1985 cutoff and the bars to compensation. So this bill now goes back to the House of Commons to be debated and voted on. So this is why it's critical now for everyone's voice to speak in on this issue and call on Canada and MPs to vote to support S2. Sharon spoke to how the minister's been speaking about this in the media, and a lot of that has been around saying, like, yes, I agree that the second generation cutoff is discriminatory and harmful. However, like, it's not our job to predetermine and pick a solution. We have to consult on this. And she's kind of emphasized that the preferred path of the Crown at this point is to continue to consult as per this collaborative process that they've had going for some time. So I will speak a little bit more to that collaborative process and to our take on kind of consultation. But first we're going to, I think, just like watch a short video excerpt from Zoe Craig Sparrow addressing the committee. So I will pause for a moment. We'll watch that video and then we'll come back.
I will now invite Ms. Craig Sparrow to give her opening remarks. The floor is yours.
Israel, hello, bonsoir. Anta Zoe Craig Sparrow, Talitznak Humathquim. My name is Zoe Craig Sparrow, and I am from the Hunkaminam speaking Humathquim peoples, and was born and raised on Musqueam Indian Reserve Number 2 in what is now known as Vancouver, British Columbia. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin peoples. I first want to make clear that I am in support of Bill S2, but there are key amendments that must be made before it is passed. The second generation cutoff was introduced in 1985 and is a genocidal assimilationist policy that will lead to the legal extinction of First Nations. It must be removed from the Indian Act, and an amendment to S2 is the best opportunity to make this happen. You've heard a lot about the second generation cutoff. I am the cutoff. My mother is full 6-1 status, and my father was not status, so I was granted 6-2 status. My father passed away when I was 9, and I grew up on the reserve with my mother, next door to my grandma, my aunt, and my grandpa, Ed Sparrow, who raised me fishing on the Fraser River. I now own a home next to my mother's and plan to raise our children there, in our culture, in our language, and with our people. I met my now fiance on Musqueam. He is not status, but also grew up on the reserve. And we plan to have children together soon. Our children will not have status. In the eyes of the government, they will not be First Nations. My children will not be able to inherit my home. They will not be able to access government-funded education support or share my government-funded healthcare. And perhaps most devastatingly of all, they will not be able to exercise their Aboriginal right to fish, which is a right so important not only to my family as Sparrows, and I'm sure you've heard of the Sparrow decision, but also to the Musqueam people as a whole. In contrast, if my parents were both status Indians, they would. If my fiance was a status Indian, they would. If I was a man born before 1985, they would. When we say this will lead to legal extinction in 3 to 4 generations, we mean of entire nations and peoples. But this is happening now, with real, tangible implications for people today like me and my family. I am the first in my family, the first generation after the intergenerational trauma of residential school, who can raise my children in a home in our community free from violence and addiction. My mother broke the cycle, and I am the first to start fresh. My grandpa fought so hard to survive residential school, to see his little family, as he calls us, succeed, and he is so proud of me. Isn't that what reconciliation is? Giving us a chance to rebuild the lives, culture, families, and rights that have been stolen from us? I am the first in my family to go to university, and I am the first in my family whose children will not have status. If we allow the second generation cutoff to continue, we are letting the genocidal assimilationist goals of colonization succeed. I implore you, senators, do what you did in Bill S3 and what you called for in your Make It Stop report, and stand up for what is right. People's rights are being violated right now. And every day that passes that we allow extinction documents to be a part of the legal backbone of our country is a day too many. I know that some argue there are these lengthy consultations underway and that we should just keep waiting. But you cannot consult on gender and race discrimination, and you cannot consult on genocide. And we cannot keep waiting and afford more delays. My children cannot afford more delays. The government of Canada, however, can certainly afford more delays. In fact, they've a vested economic interest in this delay and are benefiting from unjust enrichment. The government has a fiduciary duty to Indians. Getting rid of us absolves them of this responsibility. I fundamentally disagree with any suggestion that there is a cohesive position from Indigenous peoples that it's best to move forward on S2 as is and address the second generation cutoff later. You cannot end discrimination incrementally. We cannot ensure equality for a few and then wait years, if ever, for another bill to pass, where piecemeal amendments are made and substantive equality remains a pipe dream. Especially not when we have the opportunity here to do both. I was so grateful to see Senator Greenwood share her concern, especially in light of C5, that we may have witnessed the high watermark of reconciliation and that those waters may now be receding. I sincerely hope that is not true. As a young Indigenous woman, I ask you, esteemed senators, to push farther, as you did in S3, and vote to approve amendments that will rid the Indian Act of sex and race discrimination and the legal extinction of our people once and for all. Please do not make me fight my whole life, like Sharon McIver and Jeanette Corbière-Lavelle, only to see justice delayed time and time again. Hi, Sepka. Thank you all very much.
So those reflections shared by Zoe are really emblematic of the reflections that many of our people have been sharing for a long time. So you can see on the slide deck here, this long timeline reflecting reports, studies, opportunities for consultation, human rights instruments that are relevant to this issue. And so I was like reflecting on, what I had spoken to about the current state and the approach that Indigenous Services Canada is taking on the amendments to S2 and the consultation requirements moving forward. And I just I'm not going to cover this timeline in detail. This is one of the resources. I'll cruise you through it briefly, but I just want to take the opportunity to emphasize that this is a long-standing unresolved issue. This has been studied exhaustively over decades. People have been very consistent. Basically, all of those key messages that Zoe shared in that kind of 5 minutes reflect what people have been saying for a very, very long time. Even just the last 15 years of this timeline that's on the screen show that there's been 2 previous rounds of engagement and 4 attempts to change the legislation. It doesn't show that there's just been 60 plus people who are testifying in front of the Senate, also representing hundreds of First Nations communities and individuals. The vast majority, again, are saying the same thing. We need an immediate end to the second generation cutoff. It is discriminatory. It is a form of forced assimilation. It needs to stop. Even 10 years ago, 2016, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip was emphasizing at the time that further consultation on this issue is neither necessary nor appropriate. So as noted, in that video, this does feel like a delaying tactic. First Nations have been very consistently advocating for removal of the second generation cutoff for decades. And at this point, Canada's basically kind of consulting on should we keep discriminating, which is absurd. Meanwhile, harm is being done. So now is kind of the time for action on this issue. So just to kind of orient us to what the minister was talking about in terms of a consultative process. So the Crown was undertaking this other round of input. When she's saying collaborative process, that she wants to advance rather than supporting the amended S3, what she's speaking to is this engagement effort that ISCA's had going on. It's why I was asked to develop these papers almost a year ago. And so Canada had prepared some materials, and their goal was to co-develop legislative remedies with First Nations. So even before S3, First Nations were expressing concerns about this consultative process. One, why do we have to do this again? We've been very consistent about our message. We have resolutions, we have reports, we have human rights instruments. They were also saying, why are First Nations bearing the burden of proposing solutions for legislative remedies? Why is it our job to draft legislative remedies? We've just been clear about what you need to do with your Crown law. Now just do it. We're also not funded for that as First Nations governments. Another concern was that the federal government is slow walking solutions despite having ample feedback and legal capacity to address those issues. This consultation process currently has no real clear timeline on it and no guaranteed amendment at the other end of it. There's also been kind of some ambiguity about how First Nations-led consultation events will occur and how we'll make sure that there's maximum participation in those, including both title and rights holders and affected individuals and families. And then there's this fuzzy stuff about achieving consensus amongst First Nations on legislative amendments. And that we have consensus on the need to remove the discriminatory provisions. Asking us to develop consensus on legislative language or whatever it means, just feels again like an excuse to not do the thing. So as a result of that and the kind of concerns about the process, I was asked to develop this suite of materials. So I'll walk you through those materials we developed so that you're aware that they're there. Again, the big thing here is the short-term opportunity to advocate on S3. So while I'll walk you through those things, the key thing to hold in your mind is we need to write a letter to advocate on this issue. And so I'll give you that template letter in a few minutes here. So one of the things we developed was this perspectives and positions paper. So what we did was took that long timeline that I showed you of 150 years of stuff and distilled down the set of policy issues and perspectives that First Nations have been really, really consistent about. So the first was like in this paper, and I'll show you the paper itself, but these are the 5 key things to know about that paper is like these are the 5 core shared positions. One is we need to achieve consistency with the UN Declaration. We have an international human rights instrument. It prevents discrimination on the basis of sex. We need to uphold that. Canada itself, in its United Nations Declaration Act action plan, has committed to remove these discriminatory provisions. So let's just do it already. And then the other component of this is recognizing our sovereignty over citizenship membership laws, which also should not discriminate on the basis of sex. So this is the separation that Sharon talked about between Indian Act status and our own laws and membership rules. So second is addressing sex-based discrimination in the Indian Act. So eliminating the second generation cutoff, replacing it with a one-parent rule, and restoring status to those affected. The third is properly funding First Nations governments. So increased membership means increased pressure on services. We need to fund that increased pressure. This was some of the tension that I think many of us experienced in 1985 with the added people on our membership lists. And many of the people who were re-enrolled were put in very challenging positions with not being welcomed back as they should have been because of the lack of funding that many of our governments, like they just did not receive proper funding for welcoming people back. The other is, fourth one is providing compensation and redress for the harms that have been done, kind of both on an individual and community-based level. And then 5 is improving the registration process. So making sure that when those changes are made, that there's not this big backlog that takes years and years to get through, but that we have expedited, fast processes for streamlined registration. So that's my kind of quick overview of this paper, but you can see up on the screen now, this is the link. There is a link to this paper that I think the team has put in the chat. And so there is a much longer piece here if folks are interested in reading that describes, gives a bit of a technical overview of like, what is the second generation cutoff? What are the impacts on First Nations women in particular and their descendants? There's like this nice little kind of story to try to make it real to us. And then there's the kind of forecasts or population projections and the impacts. And then the 5 calls to action that I just talked through. So that's one of the resources that's available to you. Maybe I'll go to this. So the other is just a bit of a reading list. So if you're looking for information on like what's been studied on this before, what exists, we prepared this fairly lengthy document that includes a timeline. So I had this timeline on a couple of slides ago. And then what it does is like for each key moment in this timeline or each key document gives a short little annotated bibliography. What does that thing say? What is the history of it? What do I need to know about this? And so there's a 30 some odd page document that just summarizes and synthesizes all these hundreds of pages of documents into this one piece. And then there's this added resource for a reading list. This is just the additional links and information that's available to you. Just again, kind of shortcut all of your Googling. So there's a set of First Nations materials, there's a set of the case law, and then there's a set of what the feds have produced on this issue. We have also, I spoke to this in my opening slide, but we have produced this short little document that just honors the individuals that have shown a lot of leadership on this work through the years and to whom most of our progress is owed on this. And so it's absolutely not exhaustive. This like stressed me out because I realized right away who we'd missed from it and continue to feel badly about that. But needless to say, there's many, many women who have had a significant impact here. And so we felt like it was important to acknowledge and honor them. And so this short little paper does that. As noted, there's also population projections resource available to you. So there is a link to community-specific data sheets that Stuart Clatworthy put together. Those are great. It's just with population projections over a certain amount of time, the reliability decreases a bit in the model. And so if you want something that's like fresh and based on your membership list today, you can contact that email, info@bcfnrigc.ca. That's a project that we're running to support First Nations in their data work and to ensure that they have appropriate data to make good decisions. And so we have a population projections model that can run updated projections for you that are similar to the tables that I showed you for Tlalomin earlier. And then there's a template letter, and this is the main call to action for today, is all of those materials I just walked you through. They're good background information if you're interested in more, if you want to act and you want to do something today on this issue. There is a template letter that you can download. I think the team has or will be throwing that in the chat. I'll walk you through it in just a moment. You can download it. You can send it by email. You can put it on your nation letterhead, adjust another way, whatever other way you see fit, and then you can send it to the minister with a bunch of CCs. And so this is a copy of that letter that the team has prepared. The first page is instructions, so just helping you quickly work through this efficiently so you can copy the full thing onto letterhead as I noted, add any additional content you see fit. If you're emailing, subject line, eliminate the second generation cutoff immediately. There is the address to the minister and then a group of CCs. You can and should also send this to your local MP, and so there's a list of all of their emails that are provided by a link there too. And so what this letter does is obviously just urges immediate action, like urges them to listen to us because they're saying, well, no, we can't do this because we need to listen to you through this consultation process. And so what this letter does is say, no, we have spoken on this issue. Now is the time for action. We urge you to pass the amendments made to S2 and eliminate the second generation cutoff immediately without delay. It also proposes that the consultation that's underway not be on whether or not to do this, but on how to implement it. So we need to eliminate the second generation cutoff. The conversation should be, how do we do that in an orderly, effective way, including things like streamlined registration processes, adequate funding for our governments to welcome people home, and compensation for harms that have been done. So again, just really, if nothing else from this webinar today or from my little talk, if what you can do is take a few moments to send this letter and send this email, that collective power of us acting together does make a difference. So again, just we are effective when we unite and speak as one, and the time is now to do that. There have been many advocates who have been working on this issue for a long time and made change, and we're kind of right on the precipice of maybe achieving this, and it'll only happen if we actually act, because the government's indicating we're just going to talk about it more. So if you could please review the letter, send the letter to the minister and advocate, or send that to your MP. That is the main call to action from today. So I think that's my time pretty well. So I will leave it there and hand it back to you, Cheryl. Thank you.
Thank you, Harmony. That was really interesting. And, there's such important information with your technical overview of this. The Indian Act second generation cutoff and the perspective of BC is really good to hear that, because it really provides us good insight on, what work needs to continue. We had 400 people registered for this webinar. And we received so many questions, and many people really impact and care about this work that's happening. And I'm really happy to have had so many people reach out. We had questions related to the following items: calls to action to end discrimination, expressions of frustration, fatigue at ISK, the registration process, the need for practical guidance, clarification of history of sexual discrimination and current implementations, self-determination, assertion, and First Nations authority over belonging and identity, and questions for ISK. So I please hope that we have everyone reach out with the letter. I want to acknowledge and thank each one of you for providing your questions and concerns prior to today. And I really want to thank our presenters that we've had earlier, because it's so much information, but it gives us clear direction on the work we need to continue. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we have received several personal questions related to specific families. These types of inquiries are best directed to the ISK registration reform team, who are equipped to provide the most accurate and helpful information. Their contact email will be shared in the chat shortly. And at the end of this question period, we're going to go into, we will display a slide with the contact details for both ISK, the BCFN, and the UBC staff. We appreciate your understanding and encourage you to reach out to the appropriate team for further assistance. At this time, I would like to welcome back Sharon and Harmony to join us in the question and answer period. We have prepared pre-selected questions we received from the attendees. And so our first question is, how does discrimination show up differently for women versus men across registration, band affiliations, and descendants? Can you speak to this issue of natal bands? Harmony.
Like I mean, essentially, I think Sharon spoke really well to this actually in her overview earlier, but essentially, like, there's different outcomes for a male line relative to a female line. And so, like, the one parent rule that existed up to 1985 privileged men and deprivileged women that whole time, and that issue wasn't fixed. It wasn't addressed. And so, like, we need to, like, the core of the issue here is restoring women who lost connection to their bands of origin, and nations need to be able to support women home who have been discriminated against. So the discrimination is kind of twofold, I think. One is there's the discrimination in the legal provisions of status that have affected women differently from men. And then there is, like, to be quite honest, discrimination against the women coming back from our own nations because they've not been funded effectively to address those issues. And that, I think, impacted a lot of people really negatively post 1985. And there's a risk of that again. And so how do we learn from what happened the first time, and do better if we are finally able to fix this issue this time around? So I'm not sure, Sharon, I think you're, like, smarter on this than I am. So I'd be curious to your take.
Thank you, Harmony. I'll pass it on to Sharon as well. Thank you.
Yes, Harmony. I think it's only because I've been around a lot longer. I know that you're beautiful and brilliant and can do a whole lot of things, but Well, how it affects women differently from men is, of course, the second generation cut off. The men did not have any cutoff whatsoever until C31 kicked in. So they could just pass it on forever. And the other thing that's really gender specific is unstated paternity. Mom's giving birth, and of course, there's no question about who the mom is, but the man can say, I want nothing to do with it. It's not my kid, whatever. And he can just walk away. And so if she's 6'2", for instance, and the father could be, and this again is an issue, could be as a result of a rape, as a result of incest, as a result of the father just not wanting to have anything to do with it. So it definitely discriminates against the women because the father is unknown, unstated. And the thing about the natal bans, the pressure we put on, because mainly for the women that were married pre-85, and you've got one in the one band and one in the other, they automatically transferred the woman to the man's band. So she had no say in it. She didn't even know because it wasn't well known until it started happening. And of course, in residential school, they were people from all over the place. And so many were married right out of residential school or shortly after. And again, because of the background and the dysfunction as a result of the interference with the colonial process, meaning residential schools, robbing of money and not money, but language and all of that. She gets transferred to his band, and the marriage doesn't work out. So there she is in a hostile band with no mechanism to get back to her natal band. That's what this natal thing is all about. And so C31 comes along, they reinstate the women who had married totally out. And so they have a band that they'll go back to. And I won't talk about the fact that they only let the women go back, and it was up to the band if they wanted to do a membership code, and they could not include the children. But so she's not on reserve anymore, not because she's not an Indian, but because the band she's with is hostile, and this happened quite a bit. So she's out, and she's got no mechanism to get back to her natal band. There was no provision in Bill C-31 that let you go back to your natal band. And I've actually had several cases where a woman has come to me and says, I'm from, Cook's Ferry, for instance. And Cook's Ferry has no way that you can apply to be a member of their band. If you were married out from there, totally out, they would automatically put you back. But they left these women that still had status without any mechanism, and that's still in place. And that's what the S2 now, it was C-38, but S2 is doing. It's allowing a mechanism to go back, because I contacted the band and said, this is so-and-so, and she wants to go back to her native band that she was born into. And they either refuse to communicate or just ignore. And so I wasn't able, if I even got a letter to say that we can't do it or whatever, I could appeal that and get a court order that she could go back, but they wouldn't answer. And the department says, oh, well, it's up to the bands to decide who's going to transfer into their band. And our position was that you took her out, put her in this band without her permission. You have to put her back automatically. You should have put her back automatically if she wanted to do that. You should have had a mechanism. If she wanted to do it, she could do it without having permission of anybody else, because it's her right to be back into her natal band. So that's the history between, well, with the unstated paternity for sure, and the fact that her second generation cutoff descendants hit quicker than her brothers.
Mhm.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Sharon. All right, question number 2. If someone is currently at or past the cutoff, what realistic pathway exit, if any, to regain or secure recognition? And I'll pass this one to Harmony.
Mm. I mean, like really nothing unless S2 passes. Like this is like the urgency of this moment is there is no path unless we can solve this issue. Assuming we are successful in that, then there will be a cohort of people who are entitled to status or may become entitled to status. And so I think this is like what I was kind of getting at around, like if ISK wants to continue their collaborative process or consultative process, then let's focus it on the how and the mechanisms to, like, in an orderly and useful way, support people to register pursuant to this amendment. And so we need the amendment first. Nothing happens without it. That's why today it's just like get a letter out, like do everything you can to advocate. That's our immediate thing. Should it pass, then that there'll be a process to like notify people. We need timely notification of individuals that are affected. We would need to ensure that people are clear about what they need to do in order to register. So you need certain paperwork, right? Like you need like record keeping. You need to know where to go. And so there's like a process to do that through some nations. There's a process to do that through the kind of like what used to be called the Indian Affairs Office, whatever they call themselves now. I would say that like a few years ago, I was asked to do a study on racism and the use of status cards. And we issued a report on our findings. And one of those findings was, at the time, the backlog on registration was like astounding. I would say that has improved, right? So like the service standard has gotten better. That window of turnaround has improved. If we have this volume, that's going to strain that process again. And so we need to anticipate, Canada needs to anticipate that wave of additional volume and be ready for it so that people aren't then waiting again forever and ever for recognition. So yeah, in summary, I guess in my mind, it's like one thing at a time. Let's get these amendments, let's get this bill passed. And then there is a set of work that needs to be done in order to regain or secure that recognition. Hopefully I understood the question correctly.
Thank you. We'll go on to question number 3.
I have something to say on that one.
All right.
Just quickly. Bill S3 had 2 sections to it. One was what they had wanted, and that passed in December of 2017. But we made the amendment to it that was what we called 61A all the way amendment. And it meant that anybody born before April the 17th, 1985 could have full status. If you were half status, full status. That, and the one was passed in December of 2017. The second part, the 61A all the way, was not passed until August the 15th, 2019. And that one was not advertised. So if someone should look at to see if the 2019 amendment what affected them, because the Department of Indian Affairs never advertised it. Now, if you were born before April the 17th, 1985, and you're in a line of the ones that married out, and that there's a good chance that if you put it in earlier and you didn't know that that amendment was made, you might be eligible already. And the other thing that we did with people that were definitely not eligible, we in Maryland talked about this, the adoption. My partner and I had several adoptions over the years where a lot of them, mom has 6-2 status, grandma has 6-1 status, child, other parent was not an Indian. We got mom and grandma to adopt the kids, formally adopt the kids. And there was two friends that did it, brother and sister that did it, because the Adoption Act doesn't require that you have to be married to each other or you have to be parents. So we did that as well. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. That's very awesome to hear that. Very good insight. We will move on to question number 3. How far would remedies go? Would people affected generations ago be included? Can you speak to concerns about expanding the number of entitled individuals? Sharon.
Okay, and from my perspective, the Indian Act, sort of as it stands today, with a lot of changes, was about 1874. So if you were affected by that legislation, your family was affected by that legislation, you can use what is in the act now. So yeah, it can go back that far, as far as the Indian Act goes back. And there's nothing in it that excludes somebody from, my grandmother married out in 1900. And if I can get the information on where she came from and who her family was, and if they were recognized as part of a group. And it's hard because they didn't do a lot of the recording for a long time. If they can get the information or evidence, it can go back as far as you can trace your family. So and that's what we want. We want those that were affected by the Indian Act and lost their right, that lost the recognition. And I'm saying that they have the right to recognition, but they lost it as a result of the act. From my perspective, they can go back that far, and we could probably make a good legal argument about it. And I don't see any concerns about expanding the number of entitled individuals. We're shrinking. We don't know it yet, but we've got at least a couple of generations now that are seriously affected. And so I've never been concerned, and it's about money. It's never about entitlement. It's about money. And if you're entitled, if you have the right to it, you should be able to get it regardless of the scare tactics. For the McIver case, they told the court that if the court agreed with me, then there was probably going to be 2 to 3 million people affected, and everybody got all upset about it and decided we can't handle that many people. And as you see, it's about 300,000 that were affected. And if you do that over all the bands in Canada, it's not even that many per band. But anyway, that's it.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to question number 4. If someone was registered under a spouse's band historically, what would happen now? And we will hand that off to Sharon.
Well, that's what we were talking about, the natal band. And that's what this bill was actually, this bill was only drafted to look at the natal band issue and the enfranchisement issue. And so that's in there in this legislation. So right now, what you can do is apply if your natal band has a process where you can transfer in, you can apply there to do that. And if not, you can wait to see what happens with this bill, because they have made provisions. They're not very good provisions, but provisions to transfer back through certain processes. And I believe that they have the absolute right to say, I want to go home to my natal band, and they should be automatically transferred. But and that's a right they have, but the legislation that isn't quite that simple. So right now, if there's a process to apply to go back, that they can use it. If not, you'll have to wait until S2 passes in order to exercise that. Oh, that's it.
Thank you. Question 5. If more people became newly entitled, recognized, what are the impacts on services and who is responsible for providing the resource? Harmony.
I think we all kind of like have a rough understanding of how the kind of funding works from ISK in particular to First Nations is like largely per capita based and calculated on the basis of the status Indians associated with that band. That's also true of like demand-based programs like non-insured health benefits or First Nations health benefits, I guess, here in BC, which is calculated on on the basis of whether you are status. I would say that like so there if we have a cohort of people with whose status has been restored or that they're now recognized as having status, then they'll have access to services or be eligible for services, and the budgets for those programs need to increase accordingly. And so this is where I think why there's some slow walking on this, right? Is that there are financial implications to status because of the programs that are associated with withholding status. I would say that many nations do fund programs and have expanded eligibility beyond those with status anyway. Many of the folks here who are impacted by the second generation cutoff, the nation still considers them citizens of the nation and provides programs and services to them, and they just take money from elsewhere or own source revenue in order to pay for that. Chronic underfunding of our governments and our programs and services has long been, it's a long-standing issue. It's not only related to the number of people who are eligible, but it is a long-standing chronic issue. As I noted, I think this was a key tension post 1985, is that there was not associated, funding that was like, there was some like the per capita, issue was addressed, but not other things such as access to a land base for housing for people who are returning home and some of these other financial pressures. So overall, I would say that like the key concept here is that enhanced resourcing needs to follow the recognition of the restoration of status to individuals, and those costs shouldn't just be downloaded to nations, because those will continue to perpetuate inequities, make them worse, and create tension that doesn't need to exist when we should be celebrating people that are returning to our lists.
Thank you. We will go to the next question, number 6. How does the implementation of blood quantum show up in practice? And how do they intersect with the Indian Act rules and lateral violence? And we'll hand this question over to Sharon.
Okay, blood quantum isn't a criteria and shouldn't be a criteria. Traditionally, if you look at all of our histories, we didn't. Blood quantum is, or blood is a royalty thing, right? It comes from the Europeans, that if you have royal blood, you have better recognition than if you don't. So blood quantum shouldn't be an issue. And of course, depending on what bands do, if they take over their own membership and have a blood quantum. But it's never been a practice in any of our communities. And most, even today, I have children. I gave birth to 3. I have 8, and I have one that has absolutely no Indigenous background. So I think this question causes more problems than it's probably one of the biggest things, because some of the bands are saying, well, what about blood quantum? What if they're not, they don't have any, quarter or half or whatever. So I think it's not a question that should be discussed in this. The Indian Act last rules is looking at blood quantum, because if you've got a full Indian, then that full Indian can pass it on. If you have a half Indian or one that has less blood, then so that's what this 2-parent rule is all about, is blood quantum, and of course elimination of us. And I'm not sure about lateral violence. I'm not sure how it relates to blood quantum, although we do have the colonial idea that if you have a certain amount of blood, and of course it's the royalty hierarchy that's based on it, has nothing to do with our traditional practices.
Thank you, Sharon. We'll move on to question number 7. What does the status application process look like? The timelines, the bottlenecks, the appeals, and what supports exist? And we'll ask Harmony for your response.
It's been a couple of years since I looked at it in detail, but essentially, like, there's an application process. For that application process, you need to have a set of documents, like your birth records, any name changes, that type of thing. You submit all of that. There's a process of verifying that application, verifying those documents are correct, verifying eligibility relative to the status provisions. Based on that, they make a decision and then communicate that decision back. Then there is an opportunity to appeal, or to appeal for a reconsideration if need be on that application or on that decision that's been made. That's roughly it, right? That's pretty high level and fast. Bottlenecks, it tends to be just, it's paperwork, right? So if you have missing records, that's going to, cause delays and be a problem. Like there was a backlog. I think, as I said, like, it has gotten better. But that's been like a huge issue. Um, there are also the kind of like, yeah, there's a secure certificate of Indian status. So there's, yeah, some extra paperwork, certain kind of photo requirements, all of that kind of thing. So you have to follow all of that quite carefully and make sure that that you have a complete package in the format that they need it. So in terms of like just like practically, what do you need to do? You need to have a complete package. You need to review it carefully. You need to keep your own copies. You need to track communications and kind of be on top of it. Asking for updates. Where am I at in the queue? That kind of thing. Like there's a word in Ayajuthem here. It's squeegee, which just means you have to be like persistent and kind of a pain. And sometimes you just have to be squeegee on this stuff. In terms of what help is available, like there are like registration clerks through ISK that can support that application process. And I would say some of the most capable people I know are membership clerks in community. Actually, like the membership clerk here, she just knows every single person and she is relentless in terms of following through with ISK on checking the status of people's status applications and like understands the process in and out. And so they are often a really great resource when working through that process.
What about if they have been denied?
Yeah, then you can appeal. And so you can go through a process of like kind of like, corresponding on like why you're appealing, on what grounds, and then can like submit missing information or whatever it is. It's based on the grounds of their appeal. But if they don't see that in your records, your records match the eligibility for status under the Indian Act, then that's kind of the main thing. And so like some of this is like we can submit all we want, but if the status rules don't get fixed, then again, like all of this is moot. Because if you're not eligible because of these discriminatory rules, then you will be discriminated against in your application.
I'll just add something in because I had to go through the appeal process to get into court because you can't go to court right away. You've got to appeal back to the registrar, and then if you're refused, then the registrar, then you can go through the court process. The bottlenecks and timelines are all there. We've been the Indian Act Sex Discrimination Working Group has been working on that for a long time because people are not getting their even if they have everything they need, they're not getting their status quickly. We're looking at anywhere up to 3 years, depending on what's going on. And you can get your passport in 2 weeks if you go through a process. And we've been asking the department to set in a process so we can do that with our status cards, but of course that's not happening. But yeah, the backlog there's always a backlog. We've put pressure on. Sheila Day and I wrote a letter to the department about a particular woman who was just being strung along. And when we did that, and it landed on the minister's desk, and we also sent copies to the leader, the opposition, and she got a phone call for her status in like 3 days. So it can be done. But anyway, that's all.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to question 8. What are the harms that you've witnessed from sexual discrimination in the Indian Act and why the urgency? What do you see as the biggest risk of Bill S2 if it does not pass? And we will pass this one on to Harmony and then Sharon.
I mean, we all kind of like live the harms, right? Like, I have nieces and nephews that have been cut off from status. Then our government wants does provide service to them and has to take away from other things that they might invest that money in because we choose to provide those programs and services to people that have been unfairly cut off. And those people feel that they're not as recognized as they should be. And we had like for our hearing community, what we did was with the consultative process that's underway, this collaborative process, the nation applied for a little bit of money and hosted a listening session. And what we did was just have anybody who has been affected by this come and give a testimonial. And it was like one of the most emotional meetings that I've ever been in. So people are deeply emotionally impacted by this. It does harm to them. And that's the urgency. People are living with this harm every day. It's discrimination. It's against the law. They shouldn't be doing it. The biggest risk if S2 doesn't pass, I mean, if this doesn't pass, the risk is that they never address it. And we eventually become extinct in terms of status. So, so I think this is the major opportunity. If we do nothing, nothing happens. So we should be writing letters and advocating because no one's going to do this out of the goodness of their hearts.
Okay, I've worked with the international organizations, the United Nations, the Inter-America Commission on Human Rights, and Amnesty International, and the international organization that looks at human rights abuses in all over the world. And 3 of those have come into Canada and did investigations, and I was involved with one of them. Well, actually, I was involved with all 3 of them. And the discrimination in the Indian Act has been declared nationally and internationally as the prime reason for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls crisis. And they've all said, Canada, you've got to do something about it. So it's the perception that the colonial perception about the value of First Nations women, and they have no value in the colonial process. And so, and it's kicked down through the justice system as well, the policing system. We have police that are raping young Indigenous women in the back of their police cars, in their or the in the jail cells where the video doesn't cover, and beating them up and taking them out and raping them and threatening them to if you tell anybody, we can make you disappear, and it will be an accident, and all of those kinds of stuff. So it's a way bigger picture, and there's no recourse for the women that are being abused. And what I see as the biggest risk, in Harmony's right, there will be bands that will just disappear because their descendants don't qualify to have status. And the minute that land, it's all crown land, all the reserve land is crown land. And the minute that that last status Indian dies off, the land reverts to the government. And that's the whole aim of the second generation cutoff, plus all of the other things that happened, the residential schools, what they call the 60 scoop, but it's a forever scoop. It started in the 60s because the Department of Indian Affairs transferred the responsibility for child protection to the provincial agencies and pays them for each Indian kid that's in care. And so across the country, most of the provinces have at least 50% of the care, the kids in care, Indian kids. And we make up like 3% of the population. So it's a huge budget influx for all of those provincial organizations. And so the biggest risk, of course, is dying out and not having any descendants that are recognized. And that's what the process is all about. But if you look historically across the world, the first thing, when Britain went into Ireland and dominated Ireland, the first thing they did was take the kids away from the families and put them into a confined area like a residential school, and then start abusing them, beating them up, and not allowing them to keep their traditions. And it's just, this is all just part of that long plan to end up with no Indigenous people, because we come with birthrights that include the right to the land and all of those kinds of things. So we can just say, I'll be gone before it happens, but it will happen. That's it.
Thank you for your responses. All right, and it looks like we have one more question. Is there anything you'd like to share with the First Nations people and youth who are watching who have been impacted by these policies? And we'll go to Sharon.
I think I said it before, is that first and foremost, our Indigenous worldview is something totally different from the colonizers and their stories. When we have babies, these babies are special gifts to us, and those of when we know they're coming, we just thank the Creator that and think, I must have done something really good in order to have this special gift. The children are always told from the minute that before they arrive, because you talk to them in utero about how beautiful they are, how smart they are, how important they are, and how unique they are. And if they ever left, died, nobody could take their place. And they're here for a specific purpose. And that's all of us. That's all. I do this in the classroom all the time, because the colonial process, it's built on always telling you what your deficiencies are. They never tell you how beautiful you are, how smart you are, how important you are, and you're here to do important things. And those of us that were fortunate enough to have them into our families, or have them that you in a place where you interact and can have input. We're blessed, because those what we give to them will help them move on to the journey that they need to take. And every time I ask my students, well, how many of you think you're really smart? No hands go up. And then I'll say, well, you're here. You obviously have done some things. And I'll say, well, how many of you, think that, well, you're okay? And some of them will put the hands up. And how many of you think or have been giving messages that you're actually dumb or stupid? And lots of hands go up. So our Indigenous worldview and the way we lived prior to contact, and I don't have time to tell you this, is really important, because I like myself a lot, because when I was born at home, and I was brought up outside of a lot of contact until I was 7, and I had to go to school. but I was never punished. I was never told I was deficient. I was never hit. And I was never ordered around like I was nobody. I was always important. If they wanted me to do something, they would ask. My mom's hands were always loving. My dad's hands were always loving. And never, ever was I told that I was worthless until I got into school. And by that time, I'd established an ego that I liked myself, and I was smart, and I was beautiful, and I was really important. And so that's what I want to share. They've been impacted by these policies and every other colonial thing. The moment that first white man stepped onto our land, we as Indigenous people were thought not to be persons and not to be humans because the church in the 1600s had a debate about whether we as Indigenous beings were actually humans, and they decided at that point that we were, and started putting pressure on the leaders of these colonizing countries that they should be allowed in and teach us Christianity so we wouldn't be heathens anymore. So it's a way bigger picture. This legislation is a small piece of what the overall plan has been around us as Indigenous people. If you look at our history, we never we were never violent. We were never we were never violent in our communities, and that was all imported. So anyway, I'm just saying that we should be looking at who we really are, and we as persons, everybody should be looking at ourselves. I'm the other thing I was taught, and if you look at the Indigenous worldview, is that the only one I'm in charge of is me. I only tell myself what to do. And so that means a lot of the interactions I have, I never get upset because somebody else's actions shouldn't dictate what I do. And I'm just going to say one little thing is that when we were growing up, my younger sister, Mackie, went to my mom and said to my mom, Mom, Don hurt my feelings. And my Don is our older brother. And my mom just gently said to my sister, well, why did you let him do that? So that's what I want to let them know, is that what we're doing, all of the stuff that we're doing, and we're turning against each other, and that's all part of the colonial process. We lived in harmony for thousands of years without wiping ourselves out because of hostility to each other. That's it.
Thank you. Good jam to both of you, Sharon and Harmony, for sharing your valuable knowledge with us today. I guess I want to do a reflection of the ongoing impacts of sexual discrimination under the Indian Act. It is clear that these are outdated, inequitable policies and continue to affect First Nations communities in profound ways. The Indian Act treatments of First Nations women, particularly the differentiating rules for transmitting status, has created long-lasting consequences that are felt across generations. The second generation cutoff and the unequal status transmission rules have not only disempowered First Nations women, but have also contributed to the erosion of cultural ties, land connections, and governance structures within our communities. As a result, many individuals, particularly children and grandchildren, face the painful reality of being disconnected from their heritage and legal entitlements. This systematic discrimination has put a strain on First Nations communities, forcing them to support non-status members without the same government resource or recognition. However, the advocacy and tireless efforts of the leading plaintiffs, the Indian Act Sexual Discrimination Working Group, alongside organizations like UBC, IC, and BCFN, with leadership of First Nations women and advocates, have brought attention to these injustices and began to shift the conversations toward meaningful legal reform. The recent passage of amendments of Bill S2 in the Senate represents a significant victory. Yet the work is far from over. It is essential that changes are upheld in the House of Commons and that further steps are taken to ensure the full restoration of rights and the removal of discriminatory provisions in the Indian Act. As we move forward, it is crucial to recognize the broader context of these efforts, the struggle for self-determination, and the right to be recognized by the Government of Canada that the First Nations define their own citizenship and membership. The fight for justice and equality under the Indian Act is not just about correcting legal words. It is also about reaffirming our collective rights to culture, identity, and governance. It is about ensuring the First Nations and all of our descendants can thrive and reclaim their rightful place in their communities. In closing, I urge everyone to stay engaged and active in this critical moment, whether through advocacy, education, or participation in the letter writing campaigns. You hold power as title and right holders. We must continue to push for a full recognition and restore First Nations rights through Bill S2. Members of Parliament have the responsibility to right the wrongs of the past, and it is up to us as an untitled force to ensure that First Nations voices are heard and our rights are respected. The survival of our nations and cultures and identity depends on it. The next steps for this webinar has been recorded and is available at a later date on the BCFN and UBC websites. BCFN and UBCIC staff will send the resources and template letter via email to all those who registered. If you have follow-up questions about today's session, please reach out to Rochelle King, and her email is in the chat, or Elena Pinnell. If you're personally impacted and want further information from ISC or help on your family's situation, please connect with the registration reform team, who can also help with individual inquiries by email. I first want to send a big thank out for the support in our chat. We've had wonderful support throughout this webinar, and it's been a lot of hard work and dedication to put this presentation together. I want to thank the staff of the BCFN as well as the UBCIC, as well as the IRSS. They have been very supportive, and they will continue supporting with counselor support 24/7. Please reach out to them if you've had any impacts of conversation throughout this webinar. And I just would like to close our session today with a prayer. Dear Creator, we thank you for all the hard work that we've had today and all the good information that has been passed on. We thank you for giving us direction and guidance so that we can make a choice to create better hope for our next 7 generations. Please support all the families that are impacted by this. Please help the families so that they can get the support they need, and also resolutions so that they can have their children be status. We thank you for having all the attendees attend today. Please help them as they travel home. Please provide safe passage for them. We thank all the attendants for being here today. And we really thank UBCIC as well as the BCFN for supporting us. Guksham, thank you. I would like to say Guksham, thank you to each one of you for your time and participation. Wishing you all best in moving forward. And I hope to see you at future webinars. Guksham, thank you. Shamyam, Cheryl.